The emergency alarm rang through the massive halls of Nexus Station for the third time in 2 days. Council leader Una Kassarian walked quickly down the gleaming corridor, her long robes flowing behind her. The weight of the entire galaxy seemed to press down on her shoulders. The Galactic Council chamber was already full when she arrived. Representatives from dozens of species sat in their designated seats, their faces showing worry and fear. Some whispered among themselves in their native languages. Others sat in complete silence, staring at the large display screen at the front of the room. The screen showed a map of the galaxy. Red zones marked areas of active fighting between the Velkari Empire and the Thoran Federation. Yellow zones showed systems that had stopped all trade and communication. Green zones, marking safe areas, were becoming smaller each day. Una took her place at the center podium. Her blue skin had turned pale with stress, and her usually calm voice carried an edge of desperation. "Fellow council members," she began, "the situation has grown worse. The Velkari and Thoran fleets engaged in another major battle near the Kepler Junction yesterday. 17 trade ships were destroyed in the crossfire. The Meridian colonies are requesting immediate evacuation." A tall, thin being with crystalline skin raised one of his forearms. "Council leader, surely the wise keepers of Sanctuary can mediate this conflict. They have solved wars before." Una shook her head sadly. "The keepers refuse to get involved. They say this war runs too deep, that the hatred between these two species goes back too many generations. They believe any attempt at mediation would fail." "What about the Harmony Worlds?" asked another representative, her tentacles twitching with nervousness. "Their peacekeepers have never failed to stop a conflict. They have already declared this situation beyond their abilities," Una replied. 3 cycles of war have made the Velkari and Thorans too stubborn to listen to reason. Traditional diplomacy has failed completely." The chamber fell silent. For centuries, the galaxy had relied on the same methods to solve disputes. Ancient species with thousands of years of experience would step in as neutral parties. They would hold formal meetings, present logical arguments, and appeal to the better nature of the fighting species. But this war was different. The Velkari claimed the Thorans had committed an unforgivable act of disrespect against their most sacred monument. The Thorans insisted they had done nothing wrong, and that the Velkari were being unreasonable. Neither side would back down even a little bit. Una looked around the chamber at the worried faces. The galaxy was running out of options. Trade routes that had existed for millennia were now too dangerous to use. Neutral worlds were being forced to choose sides. Smaller species were packing up their belongings and leaving for the outer rim of the galaxy. "We need to try something different," Una said finally. "We need fresh thinking, a new approach that no one has tried before." An elderly representative with gray fur and wise eyes spoke up. "What are you suggesting, Council Leader?" Una took a deep breath. "I am suggesting we ask the humans to help us." The chamber erupted in surprised voices. Some representatives laughed, others looked shocked, a few seemed angry. "The humans?" called out the crystalline being. "But they have only been part of our community for 5 years. They have no experience with galactic diplomacy." "Exactly," Una said. "They do not know that this type of conflict is supposed to be impossible to solve. They do not follow our traditional methods. Perhaps their inexperience is exactly what we need." The gray-furred representative stroked his whiskers thoughtfully. "Humans do have a reputation for unusual problem-solving methods. Remember the cargo crisis of last year? When the transport union went on strike, that human engineer named Minho simply built a completely new type of cargo ship that needed fewer workers. And the food shortage on Proxima 7, added another member. The human agricultural specialist, Yunji, did not try to grow more of the same crops that were failing. Instead, she brought seeds from Earth and taught the colonists to grow completely different plants that thrived in the soil." Una nodded. Humans seem to approach problems from angles that never occur to the rest of us. They do not follow our rules because they do not know our rules exist. But this is war, protested a nervous-looking representative with large eyes. This is not about cargo ships or farming. Lives are at stake. Entire star systems could be destroyed. Which is exactly why we need to try something new, Yuna said firmly. Our traditional methods have failed. We can either watch the galaxy, tear itself apart, or we can take a chance on a species that thinks differently than we do. The debate continued for hours. Some council members worried that sending such an inexperienced species to handle a major war would make things worse. Others argued that humans might not understand the cultural significance of the conflict and would accidentally insult both sides. But as the hours passed, and as more reports came in of destroyed ships and abandoned colonies, the council slowly came to agree. They were desperate, and desperate times called for desperate measures. Very well, Yuna announced as the debate finally ended. We will contact Earth and request their assistance. But which human should we choose? This person will carry the hopes of the entire galaxy. The Council's research division had prepared files on several potential candidates. They reviewed diplomats, politicians, and military leaders. But one file stood out from the rest. Jiho Park, Yuna read aloud. Former crisis negotiator from the city of Seoul on Earth. He specialized in resolving disputes between large corporations and international conflicts. His success rate was 93%. What makes him special? Asked the gray-furred representative. Yuna continued reading. According to his file, he never used standard negotiation techniques. Instead, he focused on finding common ground between opposing parties. He believed that people could not hate each other if they truly understood each other. His methods were highly unconventional, added the research specialist, a being with multiple eyes who could read several documents at once. In one case, he resolved a major corporate merger dispute by taking the executives camping for a week. In another, he ended a border conflict between two Earth nations by organizing a joint cooking competition. The chamber was quiet as the members considered this information. Finally, the elderly representative spoke. Perhaps unconventional is exactly what we need. Send for this Jiho Park. 3 days later, a small human transport ship docked at Nexus Station. The being who stepped off the ship was not what the council members had expected. Jiho Park was of average height for a human, with kind eyes and a calm smile. He wore simple clothes and carried only a briefcase and what appeared to be some sort of insulated container. Yuna met him at the docking bay personally. Ambassador Park, thank you for coming so quickly. The entire galaxy is grateful for your assistance. Jiho bowed politely in the human custom. Thank you for trusting us with this responsibility, Council Leader. I understand the situation is quite serious. Indeed it is, Yuna said as they walked toward the council chambers. I must warn you, many of our traditional mediators have declared this conflict impossible to resolve. The hatred between the Velkari and Thorans runs very deep. Jiho nodded thoughtfully. In my experience, the deeper the problem seems, the simpler the solution usually is. People fight when they forget that their enemies are people too. Yuna looked at the container he was carrying. What is that, if I may ask? Jiho smiled. Just some supplies I might need. I always find that people think more clearly when they are comfortable and well-fed. As they entered the council chamber, Yuna could not shake the feeling that she was either making the best decision in galactic history or the worst mistake of her career. The fate of billions of beings now rested in the hands of a human who seemed more prepared for a picnic than a peace summit. But perhaps, she thought, that was exactly what they needed. Crosswind Station floated in the empty space between two star systems. It was the only neutral territory that both the Velkari Empire and Thoran Federation would agree to visit. The station was old and simple, built for trade meetings long before the war began. Jiho Park stood in the main docking bay watching the first ship arrive. The Velkari vessel was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Its hull gleamed like polished silver, and weapon ports lined its sides. The ship moved through space with the grace of a hunting bird. The airlock opened with a soft hiss. 6 Velkari warriors stepped out in perfect formation. They were tall beings, almost 8 feet in height, with skin that looked like liquid metal. Their bodies were lean and strong, built for fighting. Each warrior wore ceremonial armor that caught the station lights and threw them back in brilliant flashes. At the front of the group walked War Prime Taman Velkoth. His skin shone bright silver, which Jiho had learned meant anger or strong emotion. The War Prime carried himself like a sword, straight and sharp and ready to strike. His eyes scanned the docking bay like he expected an attack at any moment. "Human," Taman said in a voice like steel striking stone. "I am told you wish to speak about peace. This is amusing. Your species has existed for less time than some of our individual warriors have lived." Jiho bowed respectfully. "War Prime, Taman, thank you for coming. I know this meeting requires great courage from you." Taman's skin flickered between silver and gold. The gold meant confusion, Jiho remembered from his briefing materials. "Courage? I am Velkari. We do not fear anything, especially not small humans who play at diplomacy." "Of course not," Jiho said calmly. "I meant the courage to hope that this war might end. Hope can be harder than fighting sometimes." The War Prime studied Jiho with sharp eyes. His skin remained gold for a long moment before returning to silver. "Follow me, human. We will speak in the meeting room you have prepared." Jiho led the Velkari delegation to a simple conference room. The walls were plain metal and a basic table sat in the center. Taman looked around with obvious disappointment. "This is where you expect to negotiate the end of a 3-year war?" Taman asked. "There are no banners, no ceremonial weapons, no symbols of honor. How can we discuss matters of such importance in a place with no dignity?" "Sometimes the most important conversations happen in the simplest places," Jiho replied. He gestured to the chairs around the table. "Please, sit with me. Tell me about your people." Taman remained standing. "You know nothing of the Velkari. We are the oldest warrior culture in the galaxy. For 10,000 years we have protected the weak and punished those who break the sacred laws. Our honor is written in starlight and sealed with the blood of our enemies." "That sounds like a heavy burden," Jiho said quietly. "To protect everyone and punish wrongdoing for so many years. Your people must be very tired." Taman's skin flashed gold again. No one had ever called the Velkari tired before. "We do not tire. We do not rest. We do what must be done because no one else will do it. But surely you must enjoy some things besides fighting," Jiho said. "What brings joy to the Velkari when they are not at war?" The War Prime looked confused by the question. "Joy? We find satisfaction in victory. We find purpose in battle. What else would we need?" Jiho leaned forward slightly. "What about food? Everyone needs to eat. What do your people enjoy eating?" "Food is fuel," Taman said dismissively. "We consume what is necessary to maintain our strength. Velkari warriors do not waste time with pleasure eating." "But you must have some preferences," Jiho pressed gently. "Something that reminds you of home or childhood or peaceful times." For the first time, Taman's rigid posture softened just a little. His skin turned a pale blue, which meant memory or sadness. "There are crystal fruits that grow in the gardens of our home worlds. They are not necessary for nutrition, but they have been part of our culture since before we reached the stars." "Tell me about them," Jiho said with genuine interest. Taman looked suspicious, but something in Jiho's tone made him continue. "They grow on tall trees with silver bark. The fruits are clear like glass, but they glow with soft light. When you bite them, they taste like starlight and morning dew. My mother used to say they contained the dreams of our ancestors. They sound beautiful, Jiho said. Do you grow them on your warships? Of course not, Taemin snapped, his skin returning to silver. Warships are for fighting, not for gardens. We have no time for such softness during conflict. Jiho nodded thoughtfully. I understand. When did you last taste a crystal fruit? Taemin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. Not since the war began. There has been no time to return to the home worlds. The Thoran threat requires constant vigilance. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the second delegation. The Thoran ship was completely different from the Velkari vessel. It looked like a giant metal box with engines attached. There were no elegant curves or decorative elements. It was built purely for function, not beauty. The Thorans who emerged were as different from the Velkari as space was from solid ground. They were short and stocky, about 4 feet tall, with thick fur covering their bodies. Their faces looked like a cross between a badger and a bear, with small dark eyes and powerful-looking hands. Chief Engineer Subin Tharmek led the Thoran group. She wore practical work clothes covered with tool belts and equipment pouches. Her fur was brown with gray streaks, and her eyes were bright with intelligence. "Human ambassador," she said in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. "I am told you believe you can stop this war. This seems unlikely, but Thorans are practical people. We will listen to what you have to say." "Thank you, Chief." "Engineer," Jiho replied. "I was hoping to learn about your people and understand your perspective on the conflict." Subin snorted, a sound like steam escaping from an engine. "Our perspective is simple. We were conducting legitimate archaeological research when the Velkari attacked us. We did nothing wrong, but they refused to listen to reason." "Tell me about this research," Jiho said. "What were you looking for?" "Ancient technology," Subin explained, her eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "The site contained ruins from a civilization that existed before either of our species reached space. We hoped to learn from their engineering techniques." "That sounds fascinating. Your people must be very curious about how things work." "Of course we are," Subin said proudly. "Thorans are builders and fixers. We see something broken, we repair it. We see something that could work better, we improve it. This is who we are." "What do you do when you are not working on repairs or research?" Jiho asked. Subin looked puzzled. "We are always working. There is always something that needs building or fixing or improving. But you must eat. You must rest sometimes. What do Thorans do for enjoyment?" "We eat to fuel our bodies for work," Subin said. "We rest to prepare for more work. Enjoyment comes from solving problems and building things that last." Jiho smiled. "But surely you have favorite foods, things that taste especially good after a long day of hard work." Subin's fierce expression softened slightly. "Well, there are the fungus, gardens in our deep tunnels. The mushrooms that grow there are not just nutrition. They have flavors they remind us of home, of the satisfaction that comes from growing something with your own hands." "You grow your own food?" Jiho asked with interest. "Of course," Subin said, warming to the subject. "Any engineer worth her tools knows how to build a proper growing environment. The soil mixture, the moisture levels, the air circulation, it is all about understanding systems and making them work in harmony." "That sounds like very skilled work," Jiho said admiringly. "When did you last tend to these gardens?" Subin's expression grew sad. "Not since the war began. We have been too busy building weapons and repairing ships damaged in battle. The gardens are tended by others now, but it is not the same." As both meetings concluded, Jiho sat alone in the empty conference room, thinking about what he had learned. The Velkari were proud warriors who missed the simple beauty of crystal fruit from their home gardens. The Thorans were practical engineers who found joy in growing mushrooms in their underground tunnels. Both species were tired. Both had given up things they loved because of the war, and both kept mentioning food when they talked about home and happiness. Most importantly, neither group seemed to actually know much about the other. The Velkari saw the Thorans as disrespectful destroyers who had no understanding of sacred things. The Thorans saw the Velkari as unreasonable warriors who attacked first and asked questions later. But Jiho had noticed something else during the meetings. When Taemin talked about crystal fruit, his voice became gentle and his eyes grew distant with memory. When Subin described her mushroom gardens, her hands moved in careful, loving gestures like she was tending invisible plants. Both species understood the connection between food and home, between taste and memory, between sharing meals and sharing lives. They just did not realize they had this in common. Jiho opened his mysterious container and began to examine its contents. Inside were carefully packed ingredients from Earth, along with portable cooking equipment and a small notebook filled with recipes. Sometimes the best way to stop a war, he said quietly to himself, is to remind people that their enemies get hungry too. Tomorrow he would bring both delegations together in the same place, and he would show them that the distance between crystal fruit and mushrooms was much smaller than the distance between their hearts. The planet Haven's Rest had been abandoned for 20 years. Once, it was a farming world where different species grew crops together in peace. Now, tall grass covered the empty fields, and wild flowers bloomed where houses used to stand. The air was clean and the sky was blue, but no one lived there anymore. Jiho Park stood in the middle of a large field, looking at the two ships that had just landed. The Velkari vessel gleamed silver in the morning sun. The Thoran ship sat like a metal block next to it. Both delegations would be angry about meeting in such a simple place, but that was exactly what Jiho wanted. He had spent the morning setting up his equipment. Instead of a conference table, he had arranged stones in a circle to make a fire pit. Instead of chairs, he had placed logs around the fire for people to sit on, and instead of formal documents, he had unpacked his cooking supplies. The mysterious container he had been carrying revealed its secrets. Inside were carefully wrapped packages of meat from Earth, along with vegetables, spices, and bottles of dark sauce that smelled rich and complex. Jiho had also brought a metal grill that he assembled over the stone fire pit. War Prime Taemin emerged from the Velkari ship first. His skin flashed bright red when he saw the simple setup. Red meant anger or outrage. Behind him, 6 Velkari warriors looked around the field with obvious confusion. "What is the meaning of this?" Taemin demanded, his voice cutting through the peaceful morning air. "Where is the negotiation chamber? Where are the formal protocols? This looks like a camping expedition, not a peace summit." Chief Engineer Subin climbed down from the Thoran ship with her usual practical efficiency. Her thick fur bristled when she saw what Jiho had prepared. "Human Ambassador, this setup makes no sense from an engineering perspective. There are no proper communication systems, no recording devices, no security arrangements. How can we conduct serious diplomacy in an open field?" Jiho smiled calmly and gestured to the logs around the fire pit. "Please, both of you, sit down. Before we talk about your war, we are going to share a meal together." Both delegations stared at him in shock. Taemin's skin cycled rapidly through red, gold, and silver. "Share a meal? Are you insane? Velkari do not eat with their enemies. It is against every principle of warrior honor. And Thorans do not consume unknown substances," Subin added, her small dark eyes narrowing with suspicion. "We have no data about the safety or nutritional value of whatever you plan to prepare." "That is exactly the problem," Jiho said gently. He began arranging pieces of meat on the grill, which he had heated with a small portable flame device. "You see each other as enemies instead of people. You worry about honor and safety instead of understanding. The smell that began to rise from the grill was unlike anything either species had ever experienced. Jiho had marinated the meat overnight in a sauce his grandmother had taught him to make. The combination of sweet and salty flavors, mixed with smoke from the cooking fire, created an aroma that seemed to reach directly into the brain and trigger feelings of hunger and comfort. Taemin took a step backward. What strange magic is this? The scent is affecting my thoughts. No magic, Jiho said, turning the meat carefully with metal tongs. Just good cooking. Food is the most basic thing all living beings share. Everyone gets hungry. Everyone enjoys taste. Everyone remembers meals that made them happy. Subin's nose twitched as she analyzed the smell. The chemical compounds are creating a strong response in my olfactory system. This is most unusual. Thorin cooking does not produce such complex aromas. Neither does Velkari food preparation, Taemin admitted, his skin shifting to a curious blue color. Our meals are efficient but simple. We do not spend time creating unnecessary sensory experiences. Jiho began placing vegetables on the grill next to the meat. Maybe that is part of your problem. When you stop taking time to enjoy simple pleasures, life becomes only about conflict and work. Food connects us to our homes, our families, our happiest memories. As the vegetables began to cook, their natural sugars caramelized and added sweet notes to the smoky air. Jiho pulled out small containers of side dishes he had prepared earlier. There was rice seasoned with herbs, pickled vegetables that crunched between the teeth, and a spicy sauce that burned pleasantly on the tongue. Despite their protests, both delegations found themselves moving closer to the cooking area. The Velkari warriors maintained their rigid formation, but their heads turned constantly toward the grill. The Thorin engineers tried to look professional, but their eyes followed every movement of Jiho's cooking tools. "This is ridiculous," Taemin declared, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "We came here to discuss terms of war, not to watch a human play with fire and meat." "We came here to find a logical solution to our conflict," Subin agreed, but she took another step closer. "Food preparation is irrelevant to diplomatic negotiations." Jiho tested a piece of meat with his finger, checking for doneness. "Is it, though? Think about the last time you ate something that made you truly happy. Where were you? Who were you with? What was happening in your life?" Taemin's skin flickered to the pale blue of memory. "Crystal fruit season on Velkari Prime. I was young before my first battle. My family gathered in the garden, and we ate the glowing fruits while the sun set behind the silver trees." "The mushroom harvest in Deep Warren 7, Subin said softly. "I had just completed my first major engineering project. The whole community came together to celebrate, and we ate the mushrooms I had helped grow." "Were you enemies then?" Jiho asked, beginning to arrange the cooked food on plates he had brought. "Were you thinking about war and conflict and who deserved to die?" Both leaders fell silent. The other members of their delegations had moved even closer, drawn by the irresistible smell of perfectly cooked food. Jiho held out the first plate to Taemin. "War Prime, would you honor me by being the first to taste this meal I have prepared for you?" Taemin stared at the plate. The meat was perfectly browned, glistening with juice and marinade. The vegetables were bright and colorful. The rice steamed gently in the cool morning air. This is not proper protocol." "There is no protocol for ending a war that should never have started," Jiho said gently. "Sometimes we have to create new ways of doing things." Slowly, carefully, Taemin reached out and took the plate. His skin had turned a soft gold color that meant uncertainty mixed with curiosity. Jiho prepared a second plate and offered it to Subin. "Chief Engineer, I would be honored if you would share this meal with us." Subin looked at the food, then at Taemin holding his plate, then back at
Yeehaw.
This violates every safety protocol in the Thoran engineering manual. But you are not just an engineer, Jiho said. You are a person who grows mushrooms and remembers harvest celebrations. You are someone who understands that the best things in life come from taking careful risks. Subin took the plate with both hands. Her fur had stopped bristling, and her expression had softened. Jiho prepared plates for the rest of both delegations. As he worked, he talked quietly about the food he was serving. He explained how the marinade broke down the tough fibers in the meat to make it tender. He described the way the smoke added flavor that could not be created any other way. He talked about how sharing food was humanity's oldest way of showing friendship and respect. When everyone had a plate, Jiho raised his own portion. Before we eat, I want to say something. Each of you traveled far from home to be here today. Each of you left behind people you care about. Each of you is tired of fighting and ready for peace, even if you are afraid to admit it. He looked directly at Taemin. War Prime, your people have fought bravely to protect what they consider sacred. Your honor is not in question here. Then he turned to Subin. Chief Engineer, your people were conducting legitimate research to benefit everyone. Your motives were pure. Now, Jiho said, taking his first bite, let us eat together, and remember that enemies are just friends who have not had a chance to understand each other yet. Taemin lifted a small piece of meat to his mouth. The moment it touched his tongue, his skin exploded into brilliant copper, the color of pure pleasure and surprise. The flavors were unlike anything in Velkari cuisine, complex, layered, satisfying, in ways he had never experienced. Subin bit into a piece of grilled vegetable. Her eyes widened and her fur stood up straight with delight. The combination of smoke, sweetness, and the mysterious marinade created taste sensations that her practical Thoran mind could barely process. For the first time in 3 years, Velkari and Thoran representatives sat in the same space without weapons ready, sharing food and discovering that their enemies could create something beautiful. The meal changed everything. As the sun climbed higher over Haven's Rest, something extraordinary happened around the simple fire pit. War Prime Taemin and Chief Engineer Subin, who had spent 3 years trying to destroy each other, were actually talking, not arguing, not making demands. Talking. It started slowly. Taemin took another bite of the marinated meat, and his copper-colored skin grew even brighter with pleasure. This flavor combination is remarkable, he said to Jiho. Velkari, food focuses on purity of taste. Each ingredient stands alone, but this blend creates something entirely new. Subin nodded enthusiastically, a piece of grilled vegetable halfway to her mouth. The chemical reactions are fascinating. The heat breaks down the cellular walls while the marinade penetrates the protein structure. It is like engineering, but with food instead of metal. Engineering? Taemin asked, his skin shifting to curious blue. How is cooking like engineering? Subin's eyes lit up with the passion that came over her whenever she talked about building things. Everything must work together in perfect balance. Temperature, timing, ingredient ratios. If one element is wrong, the whole system fails. It requires precision and understanding of how different components interact. That sounds similar to combat strategy, Taemin said thoughtfully. A warrior must understand how timing, positioning, and weapon choice work together. If one element is incorrect, the battle is lost. Jiho smiled quietly and served another round of food. The two leaders were finding common ground without even realizing it. Tell me about Velkari strategy, Subin said, her scientific mind clearly interested. How do you coordinate so many variables in battle? Taemin straightened with pride. Velkari warfare is an art form passed down through generations. Each warrior trains for decades to understand their role in the larger pattern. We move like a single organism, each part supporting the whole. That is exactly like a well-designed engineering system, Subin exclaimed. Every component must function perfectly and support every other component. When Thorans build something, we think about how each part affects the whole structure. As they talked, other members of both delegations began joining the conversation. A young Velkari warrior asked Subin about Thoran tunnel construction techniques. A Thoran technician wanted to know how Velkari armor could be so strong, yet so flexible. Jiho noticed that the more they ate, the more comfortable they became with each other. Food had a way of making people relax, of reminding them that they were all living beings with the same basic needs. "This meal reminds me of home," Taman said suddenly. His skin had turned the pale blue of nostalgia. Not the taste, but the feeling. When I was young, before my warrior training began, my family would gather for evening meals. We would talk about our day, share stories, laugh together. "When did you stop having meals like that?" Jiho asked gently. "When the war began," Taman replied sadly. "There was no time for family dinners. All conversations became about strategy, casualties, the next battle. Food became fuel, nothing more." Subin's fur drooped with understanding. "Thoran families eat together in the common halls of our underground cities. During peaceful times, these meals are celebrations of our accomplishments. But during the war, we eat quickly and alone, always thinking about the work that needs to be done." "You both gave up something important when this conflict started," Jiho observed. "You gave up the joy of sharing food and time with others." "But the war was necessary," Taman protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "The Thorans desecrated our most sacred monument. Our honor demanded response." "We did not desecrate anything," Subin said, but her tone was more confused than angry. "We were conducting archaeological research with full permits from the Galactic Council. We used standard excavation techniques." Jiho set down his plate and looked at both leaders. "Tell me exactly what happened at this monument. Start from the beginning." Taman spoke first. "The Monument of First Victory marks the place where our ancestors won their first battle among the stars. It has stood untouched for 3,000 years. The stone itself is sacred, blessed by our greatest warriors. We received a research permit to study pre-spaceflight civilizations in that system," Subin explained. "Our scans showed interesting mineral formations underground. We began standard excavation procedures." "Standard procedures?" Taman's skin flashed silver with renewed anger. "You brought heavy mining equipment to a sacred site. The permit specifically allowed mechanical excavation," Subin replied. "We followed all regulations. We even filed additional reports about the monument to ensure we did not damage it." Jiho held up his hand for quiet. "What happened next?" "Our drilling equipment triggered some kind of defensive system," Subin continued. "Ancient Velkari weapons came online and began firing at our ships. We thought we were under attack. The monument's guardians activated as they were designed to do," Taman said. "They detected a threat and responded appropriately." "But we were not a threat," Subin insisted. "We were scientists, not invaders." Jiho leaned forward. "So the monument worked perfectly. It detected what it thought was dangerous activity and protected itself, just as the ancient Velkari designed it to do." Both leaders stared at him. Taman's skin cycled through several colors as he processed this idea. "And Subin's people were doing exactly what they were supposed to do," Jiho continued. "Researching, learning, trying to understand the past so they could build a better future. But our ships were damaged," Subin said. 3 Thorans were injured when the defensive systems activated." "And we believed you were attacking our sacred site," Taman added. "When we arrived to investigate, your people were still operating heavy machinery near the monument." "Because we were trying to turn off the defense system that was still firing at us," Subin explained. Jiho sat back and looked at both of them. "So this entire war started because of a misunderstanding. Your monument did its job, Taman. Your research team did their job, Subin. But neither of you understood what the other was trying to accomplish." The silence stretched long enough for the fire to crackle and pop. Both delegations sat quietly, thinking about what they had just heard. 3 years of war, Taman said finally. Thousands of deaths, entire systems abandoned, all because we never actually talked to each other. We never explained our research goals to the Velkhari, Subin admitted. We assumed the permit was enough. We did not think about the cultural significance. And we never asked what the Thorans were trying to accomplish, Taman said, his skin now a deep purple that meant shame. We saw the machines and assumed the worst. Jiho served the last of the food, a sweet dessert he had prepared with fruits from Earth. The question now is what you want to do about it. The dead cannot be brought back, Taman said heavily. The damage cannot be undone, but we can stop more people from dying, Subin added. We can end this before it gets worse. As they ate the sweet fruit, something else happened. Subin pulled out a small electronic tablet and began making sketches. These cooking techniques are fascinating, she said to Jiho, but your equipment is very primitive. With some basic engineering improvements, you could cook more efficiently. She showed her tablet to Taman. Look, if we modified the heat distribution system and added temperature controls, the cooking time could be reduced by 40%. Taman studied the diagrams with interest. This design is clever, but for large groups, you would need a bigger cooking surface. Velkhari ceremonial feasts can feed hundreds of people. That is easily solved, Subin said excitedly, her fingers moving quickly across the tablet. We could build modular units that connect together. Each unit could handle different cooking temperatures for different types of food. Before long, they were designing cooking equipment together, combining Thoran engineering with Velkhari knowledge of large-scale food preparation. Their warriors and technicians joined the discussion, contributing ideas and asking questions. Jiho watched with amazement as former enemies worked together to solve problems. They were still talking about grills and cooking temperatures, but they were thinking like partners instead of opponents. You know, Subin said as she finished a particularly complex diagram, this collaborative approach could work for other projects too. Thoran excavation techniques combined with Velkhari historical knowledge could help us study ancient sites without triggering defensive systems. And Velkhari security protocols could protect Thoran research teams from real dangers, Taman added. We know the locations of many hazardous archaeological sites that should be studied carefully. Jiho smiled and pulled out his small notebook. Speaking of collaboration, I brought something that might interest both of you. He opened the notebook to reveal page after page of recipes, cooking techniques, and food preparation methods from Earth. These are family recipes passed down through generations. My grandmother taught them to me, just as her grandmother taught them to her. Both leaders leaned forward to examine the notebook. The pages were filled with careful handwriting, detailed instructions, and small drawings showing proper techniques. You would share this knowledge with us? Taman asked, his skin glowing with warm gold. Food is meant to be shared, Jiho replied. Recipes become better when different people try them and add their own improvements. Maybe Velkhari crystal fruit would work well in some of these dishes. Maybe Thoran mushrooms would add interesting flavors to others. We could create fusion cuisine, Subin said thoughtfully, combining the best elements from all three cultures to create something entirely new. As the sun began to set over Haven's Rest, the two delegations sat around the dying fire, no longer thinking about war. They were thinking about recipes, about collaborative research projects, about the possibility that their two species might actually work well together. The transformation was remarkable. Hours earlier, they had been ready to fight. Now they were planning joint cooking competitions and archaeological expeditions. Jiho packed away his cooking equipment as the delegations prepared to return to their ships. Tomorrow they would meet again to formalize what they had discovered today. But the real work was already done. They had remembered that enemies are just people who have never had a chance to understand each other. And understanding, it turned out, was much easier to achieve over a good meal. 1 month later, Nexus Station buzzed with excitement unlike anything in its long history. Representatives from every major species in the galaxy had come to witness something that most thought was impossible: the formal end of the Velkhari Thoran. War Council leader Una Kassarian stood at the podium in the Great Assembly Hall, looking out at hundreds of beings from dozens of worlds. In the front row sat War Prime Taman Velkoth and Chief Engineer Subin Tharmek, side by side instead of at opposite ends of the room. "Fellow council members," Una began, her blue skin glowing with relief and joy. "Today marks not just the end of a devastating conflict, but the beginning of a new approach to galactic peace." Behind her, a massive display screen showed the official treaty document. The formal title read, "The Haven's Rest Accords, a framework for interspecies understanding and cooperation." But attached to the serious diplomatic language was something completely unexpected. A second document, bound with colorful ribbons, bore the title, "The Galactic Guide to Human Barbecue and Interspecies Cuisine." Jiho Park sat in the diplomatic section, wearing his simple clothes and carrying the same notebook that had started everything. Next to him sat representatives from both species who had become his co-authors in an unlikely collaboration. "The treaty includes several revolutionary provisions," Una continued, reading from the official document. "First, the establishment of cultural exchange kitchens on 12 border worlds, where different species can share their food traditions and learn from each other." A murmur of interest went through the assembly. Many representatives had never heard of such an idea. Second, the creation of joint archaeological teams combining Velkhari security expertise with Thoran research methods, ensuring that future excavations respect both scientific discovery and cultural significance. Taman stood briefly, his skin shining with proud gold. "The Velkhari Empire pledges to protect all legitimate research efforts and to share our knowledge of sacred sites so they may be studied safely." Subin rose next, her fur neat and her voice clear. "The Thoran Federation commits to consulting with local cultures before beginning any archaeological work and to sharing all discoveries for the benefit of galactic knowledge." Third, Una continued, the implementation of a new diplomatic protocol requiring that all future interspecies negotiations include at least one shared meal to encourage understanding and communication. This caused quite a stir in the assembly. Several representatives looked shocked, others seemed amused, and a few appeared thoughtful. "But perhaps most remarkably," Una said with a smile, "this treaty comes with something unique in galactic history: a cookbook." She gestured to Jiho, who stood and walked to the podium carrying his notebook and a larger, professionally printed volume. "Ambassador Park, would you please explain this unusual addition to our diplomatic archives?" Jiho bowed politely to the assembly. "Council members, when I first came to help with this conflict, I brought only two things: an open mind and my grandmother's recipes. I learned that food is a universal language that speaks to every living being." He held up the printed cookbook. "This guide contains not just human cooking techniques, but contributions from both Velkhari and Thoran cultures. War Prime Taman shared the secrets of crystal fruit preparation. Chief Engineer Subin provided detailed instructions for growing and cooking underground mushrooms. More importantly," Jiho continued, "working together to create this cookbook taught our three species that collaboration produces better results than conflict. Every recipe in this book has been tested and improved by cooks from all three cultures." Taman stepped forward. "The Velkhari Empire has already established the first cultural exchange kitchen on our border world of Silver Ridge. Our warriors are learning to prepare human and Thoran dishes. It has become our most popular assignment." "The response has been extraordinary," Subin added. "Thoran engineering teams have developed portable cooking equipment that can adapt to any world's atmospheric conditions. We are installing these kitchens throughout Thoran space. Yuna nodded approvingly. The cookbook has become the fastest-selling publication in galactic history. Beings from over 50 species have requested copies. This was true. In just 1 month, the simple recipes that started with Jiho's barbecue had grown into a galactic phenomenon. Restaurants across known space were experimenting with fusion cuisine that combined ingredients and techniques from multiple worlds. A representative from the crystal-based silicon species raised one of her many arms. "Council leader, how do we know this approach will work for other conflicts? Perhaps it only succeeded because the war was based on a misunderstanding." Jiho nodded respectfully. "That is a fair question. But in my experience, most conflicts are based on misunderstandings. People fight because they see others as different, dangerous, or wrong. Sharing food reminds us that we are all just living beings trying to survive and find happiness." "The psychological effects are measurable," Subin added, pulling out her ever-present tablet. "When beings eat together, their stress hormones decrease and their cooperation indicators increase by an average of 37%. It is simple biology. And the cultural exchange builds genuine respect," Taemin said. "When you learn to prepare someone else's traditional food, you begin to understand their values, their history, their way of seeing the world." An elderly representative from the wisdom world spoke up. "But surely there are limits to this approach. What about species with completely incompatible diets, or those who do not eat at all?" Jiho smiled. "The principle adapts. For energy-based species, we have developed shared power generation ceremonies. For beings who absorb nutrients through their skin, we create communal bathing experiences with beneficial mineral solutions. The key is finding something that all parties can enjoy together." "The cookbook includes instructions for over 200 different types of beings," Subin added proudly. "It is a truly universal guide to sharing positive experiences across species barriers." Council leader Yuna gestured to the display screen, which now showed images from cultural exchange kitchens across the galaxy. Beings who had never interacted before were working together, laughing together, learning from each other. "The Haven's Rest Accords represent more than just peace between two species," she announced. "They represent a new philosophy of galactic relations based on understanding rather than fear, cooperation rather than competition. Most importantly," she continued, "they prove that sometimes the most powerful solutions come from the simplest approaches. Ambassador Park showed us that the way to stop people from fighting is not to make them afraid of each other, but to help them see what they have in common." The formal ceremony concluded with the traditional signing of the treaty. But instead of using ancient ceremonial pens, Taemin and Subin signed with cooking utensils that Jiho had given them. The War Prime used a meat fork, while the chief engineer chose a mixing spoon. As the official proceedings ended, something wonderful happened. The assembly hall was transformed into the largest cultural exchange kitchen ever created. Cooking stations appeared throughout the room, staffed by chefs from dozens of species. Representatives who had arrived expecting dry diplomatic speeches found themselves learning to prepare dishes from worlds they had never visited. The crystal-based Silicom learned to infuse their mineral nutrients into Thorin mushroom broths. The gas cloud nebulans discovered they could add their atmospheric compounds to Velkari crystal fruit preparations to create entirely new flavor experiences. Jiho moved through the crowd, notebook in hand, collecting new recipes and teaching anyone who wanted to learn. His simple barbecue techniques had evolved into something much bigger, a galactic movement toward understanding and cooperation. As the celebration continued late into the station's night cycle, Council leader Yuna found herself standing next to Jiho at one of the cooking stations. "Ambassador," she said quietly, "when we first asked for your help, many of us thought we were making a desperate mistake. Sending an inexperienced human to solve an impossible conflict seemed like the act of a council that had run out of options." Jiho looked up from the vegetables he was preparing. "And now?" Yuna smiled, her blue skin glowing with warmth. Now I think we discovered something revolutionary. You did not solve the Velkari-Thorin conflict by being a better diplomat than our traditional mediators. You solved it by refusing to accept that it was impossible. Humans have a saying, Jiho replied, handing her a perfectly grilled piece of seasoned protein. The way to a person's heart is through their stomach. It turns out this works for entire species too. Around them, the sounds of laughter, conversation, and sizzling food filled the air. Former enemies worked together, create meals would share with new friends. The galaxy had learned that peace was not something that had to be negotiated or fought for. Sometimes, peace was something that could be cooked up over a simple fire, one shared meal at a time. The Haven's Rest Accords would be remembered as the most successful peace treaty in galactic history. But the real legacy was simpler and more profound. The understanding that the best way to end a war is to give people something better to do with their hands than fighting. Something like cooking. Together, eating together, and discovering 6 months after the Haven's Rest Accords were signed, the galaxy had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The simple idea of sharing food had grown into a revolution that touched every corner of known space. On the former war zone of Kesser Prime, construction crews worked side by side rebuilding cities that had been destroyed in the fighting. But these were not ordinary construction crews. Velkari warriors wielded hammers with the same precision they once used for swords. Thoran engineers taught them how to build structures that would last for centuries. And every day at noon, work stopped for community barbecues that had become the planet's most cherished tradition. Jiho Park stood on a hill overlooking the largest reconstruction site, watching former enemies laugh together as they shared lunch around portable grills. His simple cooking equipment had been improved by Thoran engineering and mass-produced across the galaxy. "Ambassador Park," called a familiar voice behind him. He turned to see War Prime Taman approaching, but the proud warrior had changed dramatically. His ceremonial armor had been replaced by practical work clothes, and his hands were stained with cooking spices instead of weapon oil. "Please, just call me Jiho," he replied with a smile. "How is the academy coming along?" Taman's skin glowed with excited gold. "Beyond our wildest dreams. The Velkari Interspecies Culinary Academy now has students from 47 different worlds. My combat cooking classes are booked solid for the next 6 months. Combat cooking? Jiho raised an eyebrow. We combine traditional Velkari warrior discipline with food preparation techniques, Taman explained proudly. Students learn to move with precision, work under pressure, and coordinate perfectly with their team members. But instead of destroying things, they create beautiful meals. And the meditation classes? Taman's expression grew peaceful. Meditation through marinade has become our most popular offering. Students learn to focus their minds while preparing complex spice mixtures. It brings the same inner calm that combat training once provided, but without the violence. They were interrupted by the arrival of Chief Engineer Subin, who climbed the hill with her usual efficient stride. She carried a tablet displaying engineering, diagrams, but her fur was dusted with flour from her morning baking classes. "Jiho, Taman," she greeted them warmly, "I have excellent news from the Institute. Our portable diplomatic kitchens have been deployed to 12 active conflict zones in the past month." "Any successes?" Jiho asked. Subin's eyes lit up with excitement. "The border dispute between the methane breathers and the oxygen worlds was resolved in just 4 days. It turned out both species had similar preferences for slow-cooked proteins. They are now planning joint atmospheric research projects. And the mining rights conflict near the Spiral Nebula settled over a shared meal of crystallized energy formations," Subin reported. "The competing species discovered they could cooperate to extract resources more efficiently than either could manage alone." Jiho shook his head in amazement. "When I brought that first grill to Haven's Rest, I never imagined it would lead to this." You started something bigger than any of us understood, Taman said seriously. The Galactic Council has officially adopted the Cultural Exchange Protocol for all diplomatic missions. Every negotiation now begins with a shared meal. The engineering. Data supports this approach completely, Subin added, consulting her tablet. Conflicts resolved using cultural exchange methods have a 94% success rate. Traditional diplomatic approaches only succeeded 67% of the time. A young voice called up from the construction site below. Ambassador, Jiho, can you show us the proper way to flip the protein portions? Jiho looked down to see a mixed group of Velkari and Thoran children gathered around one of the cooking stations. They had been born during the war years, but were growing up in a galaxy where cooperation was more common than conflict. I should go help them, Jiho said, starting down the hill. Wait, Taman said, his skin shifting to the deep blue of important thoughts. There is something we wanted to discuss with you. Subin nodded seriously. The Galactic Council has made a formal request. They want you to establish a permanent position as cultural ambassador. Your new ship is already being built, Taman added. Velkari defensive systems combined with Thoran engineering efficiency. It will have the most advanced kitchen facilities ever installed on a starship. Jiho stopped walking and looked at his two friends. A permanent position? The galaxy needs you, Subin said simply. Every month, new conflicts arise between species who have never learned to understand each other. Your approach saves lives and prevents wars before they can start. But I am just one person with some cooking skills and my grandmother's recipes, Jiho protested. You are much more than that, Taman replied, his skin glowing with warm copper. You showed us that the most complex problems often have the simplest solutions. You taught us that enemies are just friends who have not had the chance to meet properly. Down at the construction site, the children were still waiting patiently for their cooking lesson. Jiho smiled and waved to them. I suppose the galaxy could use more cooking teachers. There is more, Subin said, pulling up another display on her tablet. The cookbook has become something beyond what any of us expected. It is not just a collection of recipes anymore. She showed him the latest edition of The Galactic Guide to Human Barbecue and Interspecies Cuisine. The simple notebook had grown into a massive publication with contributions from hundreds of species. Volume 12 was published last week, Subin continued. It includes cooking techniques from the silicon-based life forms of the crystalline worlds and fermentation methods from the gas giant floaters of Jupiter's moons. And look at this, Taman said, pointing to a section of the book. Species that have never communicated before are now sharing recipes and cooking techniques. The photosynthetic trees of Green World are teaching energy absorption methods to the solar collectors of the inner rim. Jiho flipped through the pages of the book, amazed at how much it had grown. Each recipe was more than just cooking instructions. They included cultural notes, historical background, and suggestions for adapting the dish for different species' dietary needs. The most popular section is still yours, Subin noted with amusement. Basic human barbecue techniques has been translated into over 300 languages and chemical communication methods. A message alert chimed on Subin's tablet. She read it quickly, then looked up with excitement. Perfect timing. We just received a priority request from the Outer Rim. 2 newly discovered species are having territorial disputes. The Galactic Council wants to send a cultural ambassador immediately. Where? Jiho asked, already knowing what his answer would be. The Kepler 442 system, Taman replied. A species that lives in the planet's oceans and another that lives in its clouds. They are fighting over mineral rights in the atmosphere-ocean boundary zone. Interesting challenge, Jiho mused. I will need to develop recipes that work in both aquatic and gaseous environments. The ship will be ready in 2 days, Subin said, fully equipped with adaptive cooking systems for any environmental conditions. Jiho looked out over the construction. Sight one more time. The sight still amazed him. Beings who had been killing each other 6 months ago were now building something beautiful together. Children from different species played games around the cooking fires while their parents worked, side by side. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "when this all started, I thought I was just trying to stop one war. I never imagined we were starting a new way for the galaxy to live together." "The best changes often begin with the smallest actions," Taman observed. "One human with a portable grill changed everything." "Not just one human," Jiho corrected. "One human who was willing to trust that people are basically good, even when they are fighting. And two species who were brave enough to try something new." They walked down the hill together toward the construction site. The children cheered when they saw Jiho approaching with his cooking supplies. Within minutes, he was surrounded by eager students from a dozen different species, all wanting to learn the proper way to season and grill their various foods. As he taught the young beings how to prepare a meal together, Jiho reflected on how much had changed. The Galactic Council's emergency protocols now listed Contact Cultural Ambassador as the first step for any diplomatic crisis. Trade routes that had been closed during the war were busier than ever, as species exchanged not just goods, but recipes and cooking techniques. The cultural exchange kitchens had become gathering places where beings from different worlds could meet safely and learn about each other. What had started as a desperate attempt to end one war had become a galaxy-wide movement toward understanding and cooperation. Ambassador Jiho called a young Thoran who was carefully turning vegetables on the grill. "My grandmother wants to know if you would visit our colony next month. She has new mushroom recipes to share with you. And my family wants to invite you to our Crystal Fruit Harvest Festival," added a small Velkari, her skin shining with happy yellow light. Jiho smiled as he watched the children work together, sharing cooking tools and helping each other with difficult techniques. These young beings would grow up in a galaxy where cooperation was normal, where differences were celebrated rather than feared. "I would be honored to visit both of your families," he told them. "But first I have to help some new friends learn to get along with each other." As the sun set over Kessir Prime, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Jiho Park prepared for his next mission. Somewhere in the Kepler 442 system, two species were discovering that they had more in common than they realized. They just needed someone to help them figure it out over a good meal. The galaxy had learned that peace was not something that had to be negotiated by diplomats or enforced by armies. Peace was something that could be created by ordinary people, sharing food, stories, and laughter around a simple fire. And if that was not the most human thing of all, Jiho thought as he packed his cooking equipment, then he did not know what was. The stars above seemed to twinkle with approval as the first cultural ambassador in galactic history prepared to bring his grandmother's recipes to another corner of the universe. Somewhere out there, enemies were about to become friends. They just did not know it yet.